In Poppy Playtime, there are both good toys and bad toys, but also young toys and very old toys. So I'm gonna be going over most of the toys that we know and giving you exactly how old they are, or if we don't know exactly, a rough estimate. So let's start with the youngest character that we know of, and that is Experiment 1424. We only know of this experiment from a note that we find during one of Harley Sawyer's tests where he releases red smoke on us. In this note, we see that the experiment's original procedure date was January 1995, and considering the fact that we came to the factory in 2005, if this character is still alive, which it seems they likely are, and this note is foreshadowing their appearance in chapter 5, then this character is about 10 years old. But because the experiments are usually orphans before being turned into an experiment, we can assume that they're about 15 years old. Next is Huggy Wuggy, the very first monster that got us into this whole mess. We know that he was created in 1990, just 10 experiments after the Bigger Bodies Initiative's first success with Boxy Boo, meaning that although Huggy was described as the ideal experiment, he wasn't as advanced as other experiments like Mommy Longlegs and Doughy. But even though he was created in 1990, he still had many years as either an orphan in Playcare or as an employee in Playtime Co., or maybe just someone who volunteered for the experiment, meaning we don't know exactly how old Huggy is. However, since we returned to the factory in 2005, we know that he's been in his body for about 15 years now. But now everybody's favorite, Kissy. She's actually a little bit harder to figure out, and that's because we don't have any documentation on her which describes her by name. However, we do have a note from chapter 4 which sounds so much like Kissy to the point where we can assume that it's just her. And this was Experiment 1172, which was made just 2 experiments after Huggy, most likely meaning that we can be 100% sure that this is Kissy. But in case you're not convinced, the document says that she dealt with a lot of anxiety and stress, and even rubbed the fur on her arms whenever she was anxious, which is exactly what Kissy does when we see her in chapter 3, pretty much confirming that this is her. And similarly to Huggy, we know that she was made in 1990, making her also 15 years old just like Huggy. But because of the way that we see them interact in the music video that Mob posted on their YouTube channel, it seems to be that they were actually really close, not just in age but maybe even related to each other. But now let's go over probably the hardest age to narrow down, and that's the prototype's age, because we know basically nothing about this dude except for a few logs which tells us more about how he acts rather than how he was made. The only thing that we can really go off of is the fact that Huggy was made in 1990, and because the prototype is called the original and was most likely made before Boxy Boo, then we can assume that the prototype was either also made in 1990 or anytime before then, because we can't really know for sure. But one more character who has probably the oldest age out of everyone is Poppy, and the reason that we know that she was the very first creation is because of what she tells us in an unused voice line from the ending of chapter 2. But after Poppy switches the tracks on us, she says that her being able to exist as a doll is the reason that all of the other experiments were made, meaning she was the very first toy to be created, making her older than the prototype.
Terrible things have happened, and I am the cause. Being able to exist as a doll, it has killed so many people. So much is unknown to you. Where do I even begin? But you can fix everything.
But another interesting piece of information is that Poppy is Elliot Ludwig's daughter. And the reason I say this is because of the Untitled tape when she says that she misses her dad who used to run the place. And the only person who I can think of who used to run Playtime Co. and also coincidentally had his office right next to where Poppy was kept is Elliot Ludwig.
I wish you were here, Dad. When you were running this place, you always knew what to say. I miss you.
So if Elliot was Poppy's dad, then there has to be a certain amount of time where Poppy was still a human, but was later brought back to life in the form of Poppy sometime before 1990. Most likely a long time before then, where I would guess that she's either 25 to 30 years old. But in the tape that we see in Elliot's office in chapter 2, which goes over a little bit about his life, it includes the death of a close family member in the 1960s. And since Poppy is the only person who's related to Elliot Ludwig that was also turned into a doll, it most likely means that this close family member was her. So if Poppy was turned into a doll in the 1960s, this means she would be born around 1955, which would make Poppy 50 years old as of 2005, which means she's not just a little girl anymore, but actually a full-grown, potentially retired woman. But a character who's way older than Poppy is her dad, obviously, Elliot Ludwig, and we don't exactly know when he was born or exactly when he died, but we can try to narrow it down. We know that he died sometime between 1984 and 1990, and that he founded Playtime Co. all the way back in 1930. And because babies can't start companies, we can assume that Elliot was around the age of 30 when he started his company, which puts his birth year at 1900. Oh my goodness, this man farts dust. And if he died between 1984 and 1990, this means that he'd be between 84 and 90 years old at the time of his death. So we can accurately say that the amount of hair follicles this man had on the top of his head did not exceed the double digits. So although he already passed away, he's still one of the longest living Playtime characters. But because it really seems that the prototype is Elliot Ludwig just based on the fatherly way that he treats Poppy, how old would that make him? Well, all we have to do is take the year 1900 to 2005, which would make Elliot 105 years old, which sounds far-fetched, but considering Poppy could be about 50 years old, then it wouldn't seem too far-fetched to think that Elliot managed to be 105 if the goal is immortality. But is there any other character that's older than Elliot? Well, almost. And the reason I say this is because of Doey. Doey's made up of 3 separate kids who were all turned into one experiment, which means that they have tripled the age. We know that one of the kids was about 15 years old, and the other 2 we could place between the ages of 8 to 10, but let's just say 8 for now. We know that Doey was made in 1993, which means 12 years have passed from his creation until now. So if we take the ages of the kids originally, which would add up to 31, and add 36 years for the 12 years that have passed, that would make Doey 67 years old, which means that Elliot Ludwig is officially the oldest Poppy Playtime character. But what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and click on this video right here.